There we go. So thanks so much for inviting me here today, Ken. It's really delightful to be here. So I'm going to be talking about film and film in Toronto. So when we think about film and how it intersects with Toronto, I imagine that typically most people think of TIFF and all of the glamour that attaches to that. But we don't necessarily think about the nitty-gritty of physical production. And we usually don't think of film in Toronto as being an economic and employment juggernaut that has complex needs with regard to infrastructure. But Toronto is, I have a slideshow. Toronto is in the top 5 production jurisdictions in North America and was recently named the second best city in which to produce film and television by Movie Maker magazine. And LA was number 1. So that is a silver medal I will take. Thank you very much. So the film industry in Toronto leverages our high-tech sector. We build globally significant creators and brands. It nourishes adjacent industries, and it makes Toronto the kind of vibrant, creative city that we're all proud of and that we all want to live in. So I'm going to go through some of these numbers for you to acquaint you with the importance of film in Toronto. So we have $2.5 billion in production volume in the city of Toronto in 2021. That's direct spend only. Now, in the 3 years prior to COVID, in terms of our growth, our production volume grew 10% year over year, every year, for the 3 years prior to COVID. And in the 2 years since, not that it's over, but in the 2 most recent years, we have had record-setting production volume numbers. So what you're seeing is an absolutely colossal growth rate. And the world is seeing this, the world is noting this, and we are getting investment as a result. So we know from working with our partners that studio space in the city of Toronto is going to increase by 68% between 2021 and 2025. That's a colossal growth. So right now, it employs 35,000 Torontonians, and it's clearly about to employ many more. And we're home to the best talent in the world. Some of the shows that recently shot here include Handmaid's Tale, Nightmare Alley, Star Trek, Umbrella Academy, Queen's Gambit, The Boys, Titans, Station 11, The Expanse, and more. And these are all international productions that Canadian creators are working on in key creative positions. We have won wheelbarrows full of Oscars and Emmys that are coming back here to Toronto in the hands of Toronto creators who then work on domestic productions. And here's another really important feature and point of distinction in terms of Toronto as a filmmaking jurisdiction, and it is this: we are nobody's branch plant. We are a diversified industry, partly international and partly domestic. Some of the shows that shoot here domestically are Schitt's Creek, sorry about the Emmy sweep, you guys, Paw Patrol, which every parent will know is a merchandising juggernaut, Pretty Hard Cases, sort of, Murdoch Mysteries, Working Moms, and the list goes on and on. So when you're watching Netflix or Amazon or Apple or Disney Plus, pick your poison, or CBC, and you're looking at big productions, you may not even know that you're looking at something that's shot in Toronto, but you may well be. And in terms of all of this industry, industry forecasts are that this growth is going to continue as Apple and Amazon continue to fight it out in the content wars. So I'm telling you a very good news story so far, but we cannot rest on our laurels. The content wars are making this an incredibly competitive market. And every week we're reading about new entrants, new incentives, new builds. Just today, the news came out that 55 new studios are being built in Vancouver. We are in a very competitive marketplace and we need to work hard to keep pace. So, and we do face some constraints in terms of doing that and some challenges that relate specifically to infrastructure, which I'll talk about. Today, I'm going to discuss how things are evolving for the industry and the challenges and opportunities that we face and what our future could look like. So I'm going to focus on infrastructure today and a bit on workforce because these are the two things we need to really carefully plan for and build. So here's that's blunt. You can't do film production without studio space. This is absolutely critical. And because Toronto doesn't have as much studio space as we need, each year we turn away well over $100 million worth of work. And that is just the shows that we know about. That's just the shows that call. When we go to LA with the mayor, as we do once a year, we often hear people just think, oh, we're not going to Toronto. Toronto's full. We're not even calling. So we need more studio space, clearly. And I thought it would be worth it for this crowd to walk you through the specific typologies of studio space that we need and that we're looking for. So this is just a personal favorite. This is Basin Street. So I would characterize this as high-tech, high-flex. This is Hackman, Capital Partners, and MBS, amongst the best in the business globally, investing in Toronto hundreds of millions of dollars, up to 500,000 square feet in studio space. But the really important piece about this is that this is on 9 acres in the Portlands, 9 prime acres of city-owned land that the city and Create.to consecrated to the film industry because it's a priority industry and put it out to international bidders. So that's a great example. That's a new build, high-tech, high-flex. Now, another really important kind of build is retrofit. Now, to call Downsview a retrofit is definitely a bit of a misnomer. What they're doing is they've got amazing airplane hangars there that Bombardier has just left that they're repurposing into, again, high-tech, high-flex film studios. But one of the really important features about Downsview is also that they are very deliberately building a hub there in the massive space that they have up there. They're building a hub that includes adjacency to relevant industries like VFX, post-production, virtual production, animation, and so on. So they're creating a creative hub up there, which is a really critical asset. Now, not all productions that shoot here need the mega stages. Some of them need smaller productions. We shoot a lot of commercials in Toronto. It's about $500 million worth of business every year. They need smaller studios. And I certainly don't mean to make generalizations, but some domestic productions tend to use smaller studios as well. So we need, kind of studios in all shapes and forms and typologies. And then lastly, I just wanted to make you aware of virtual production as an ascendant technology. So it's driven by game engine software. It creates detailed digital visual environments like you see here. And unlike green screen, the performers can actually see the images and the camera shoots them as if they were real. So The Mandalorian was one of the first really big virtual productions in the world, and part of that work was done here in Toronto. And for a brief, shining, glorious moment, the biggest motion capture in the world was in Toronto, and maybe will be again someday. So these studios have different needs altogether in terms of infrastructure. They can be massive as a mega stage, or they can even be mobile, that small. So these are the kinds of different typologies of studios that are being built. But irrespective of the typologies, what new studios all have in common are a few key things: adaptability to new technology, building or taking advantage of creative hubs, and of course, critically, advancing environmental sustainability. So in terms of sustainability, this is another evolution in terms of Toronto. So greening production is something that's a very high priority for our clients. So it's obviously a high priority for the film office at the city as well. So we recently installed 2 power drops, one in Ashbridges Bay Park and one in Casimir-Zowski. And what a power drop is it is a very large kind of plug-in that plugs directly into the grid. And from these power drops, you can get enough power to run an entire base camp. It's what we call them, where, that's all the big white trucks. A base camp, even production. So the lighting, everything, you can get all that power from a power drop. Typically what productions do is they'll use diesel generators to get that power. So these 2 power drops alone, based on past film usage at both of these sites, will prevent 400 tons of greenhouse gases from being emitted into the environment. And we're going to be installing more, 2 a year, until we determine we've hit a sweet spot. So that's one of the things we're doing with regard to sustainability. Now, I've talked about the need for studio space, which is critical. But the biggest studio we have is actually the city itself. And because productions shoot, as you all know, on our streets, in our parks, everywhere that they can. And we're certainly aware in the film office that as production studio space grows by 68%, we will have more production in this city. And so we need to maintain and expand what we call film-friendly features across the city for both productions and for citizens. So it's sustainable for everybody. So what does this mean? What are film-friendly features? Well, a couple of big ones are, number one, parking. Surface parking is critical. You can't take big white trucks into, vertical parking garages. So we need surface parking for base camps at key areas around the city. We need laybys along streets so that units can be close to where they're actually shooting. And the film industry is certainly in favor of bike lanes and in favor of street furniture. Fill your boots. But we would ask that they be removable because streets need to be dressable as locations so that we can make streets look like they're anywhere, anytime, that kind of thing. So those are just some film-friendly features that we look for. So for all of the good news related to infrastructure, a couple of serious challenges remain. Our growth is tremendous, no question, 68%, but it is not enough to meet demand. I think Vancouver's announcement today shows us that. For studios to be built, for new studios especially, to be built that will help us to meet demand, we need to protect employment lands. And I know that there is tremendous pressure from developers and from uses of these lands like last mile logistics, but this invaluable land needs to be protected for industrial and employment-intensive uses so that Toronto will be a place where people can live and work. Now, after infrastructure, what is our next biggest challenge? Well, of course, it's workforce. If our studios are growing by 68%, our workforce needs to grow enormously, and it is not a one-to-one kind of ratio. So what we did in the film office was we did a study that looked at the various typologies of studio spaces that are being built because they have different employment needs and figured out, depending on the square footage that's being built, how many more workers do we need? And we also layered over that a skills gap analysis to identify specific roles where we are underserved and our production clients are underserved in Toronto. And that gave us some really critical information, but it did not complete the picture. We worked with a partner on a study to look at barriers to access for these jobs for people who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And with these 3 pieces of information, how many jobs, what type of jobs, and what are the barriers to access, we've designed workforce development programs in the film office that are training people with the unions as amazing partners and community groups as amazing partners, that are training people for jobs that are durable, that are taking them right to the door of union membership for sustainable, long-term remunerative careers. And we're offering Black-only cohorts, Indigenous-only cohorts, 2S LGBTQ plus only cohorts, and so on. So that's some of the work that we're doing in the film office that we are enormously proud of. And because we need so many new workers, here's a humbling number, 12,000 is the number. That's how many more we need. This is a whole of industry challenge. So we're certainly engaging all of our partners and working on that very hard. And there's the slide on workforce. Enjoy it briefly, because I'm going to move on. But there's one of our programs, the launch of one of our programs. So what is the future of the film industry in Toronto? Well, it's extremely bright, but we have to play our cards right. So in terms of infrastructure, what does this mean? More and varied studios, new studios, won't happen without the protection of employment lands. In terms of the competitive marketplace that I spoke about, It is easier for smaller or newer jurisdictions to build more than we do. They have more space than we do, and their real estate is probably cheaper. So while Toronto's production volume numbers are growing, I worry about our market share. We need to protect our ability to grow and our ability to build by protecting employment lands and considering that they be prioritized for uses that drive high employment. We also need to support development that creates room for domestic production. We need a diversified industry, and we need the people who live here to be able to tell our stories to the world. That's the remarkable success of Schitt's Creek. It's the remarkable success that we saw recognized in Cannes this week with Sort of. This is a really important success story that we need to protect and grow. And they need smaller studio space in order to do that, and some bigger. Or more, just more would be good. We also need to ensure the biggest studio we have, the city itself, remains film friendly by protecting parking for base camps and protecting flexible use of public space. In terms of workforce development, the workforce that we need is actually at all levels of education and all levels in the industry. You can come into the film industry straight from high school. Or you can be a very highly skilled, highly trained technician or artist. But we can't have workforce at all levels of education, at all levels of income, living and working in Toronto if we don't have affordable housing and consistent public transit to industrial locations. And then hubs. When it comes to creative hubs, the bigger they are, the bigger you'll be. This allows for shared projects. So as I mentioned when I was discussing Downsview, having production studios proximate to VFX, post-production, animation, virtual production studios, and so on, creates efficiencies for production. But what it does is it also helps us all to capitalize on the adjacencies that exist in these industries. I mentioned briefly that virtual production, as one example, virtual production is an ascendant technology. It's run by game engine software. So there are overlaps there in the kind of training and workforce development we can do between film production and gaming. Gaming, in terms of its grosses, it outgrosses feature film as an industry in North America. It's massive. And when you look at esports, esports drives an incredible amount of tourism. So by leaning into virtual production, that allows us to lean into gaming, to accelerate all of these things at the same time and benefit industries that don't seem to be related to film production, such as tourism. Also, I honestly have no idea where I'm at in terms of timing, but I timed this. It should be good. In terms of, when you look at London, one of the leading jurisdictions in the world, one of the things that allowed them to take on a massive project like Harry Potter was the fact that they were working in hubs. So multiple companies actually worked on post-production and VFX for the same projects. And I'll come back to that in a second. Obviously, we need more environmentally sustainable approaches to production, so power drops and more. And then point number 5, which I'm not going to talk about because I can't, because I don't fully understand it myself. But I do know that we need the highest of high tech, encrypted, off-internet connectivity, private pipes. So going back to when London took an exponential leap forward as a film jurisdiction, they could handle Harry Potter because they had those pipes. They had the hub. So they had the infrastructure that allowed them to take on a mega project and fundamentally grow. Vancouver, one of our key competitors, had a massive growth spurt a few years ago without building many more studios that year. I was curious about that. I looked into it, and they did it by growing VFX, post-production, and animation. That means the big pipes that others know more about than me, but I'm certainly going to ask for them regardless. So Toronto is already a leader in a global industry that drives so much economic and employment and social impact. And this is thanks to the city government, to Create.to, to the province, even to the feds, from Ports Toronto to federal tax credits, along with, of course, industry, unions, community groups, colleges and universities, and vitally, the people of Toronto who consistently welcome productions to our streets and our neighborhoods. And I know that working together, we can reap the many benefits of this unprecedented opportunity through a citywide prioritization of thoughtful and committed development of people, studios, and hubs. And with that, the sky's the limit. So thank you. Thanks for your time.